With the whole world watching, Cyprus banks are going to open up in just a few hours from now. CNBC's chief international correspondent Michelle Caruso-Cabrera joins us from Cyprus again this evening with the very latest. Good evening, Michelle.
Larry, the banks of Cyprus finally set to reopen tomorrow after being closed for nearly 2 weeks. However, the authorities are expecting runs on the banks, so they're putting in place new restrictions to try to stem the outflow of deposits. First, Cypriots will not be allowed to withdraw more than 300 euros per day. They won't be allowed to cash any checks. They won't be allowed to cash in certificates of deposit early. And finally, if you're traveling outside the country, you won't be allowed to bring out more than 3,000 euros per person per trip. There are preparations underway for the mass distribution of cash. Tonight, a huge amount of cash arriving at the central bank under heavy guard, and a private security team is in place in the country with 35 armored vehicles to begin distribution of that cash from the central bank to the branches. The employees are getting in early in order to receive training on what to say and what the new measures are, and then the banks will finally reopen at noon. It's a key step for this country that has been through such a tough crisis, though, Larry, they still have a lot ahead of them. Back to you.
All right, many thanks, as always, to CNBC's Michelle Caruso-Cabrera. Now, for some thoughts on how this story could play out, here's the Heritage Foundation's Niall Gardner. We also have Jeff Kleintop, Chief Market Strategist from LPL Financial, and Jack Barusian, CEO of Bull and Bear Partners. Niall, how's this going to play out? Is this going to be peaceful? Are people going to accept this in Cyprus? What happens here?
I think it's a disaster. It's a train wreck, basically, that we're seeing unfolding in Cyprus. Basically, what you've seen here is a diktat from Brussels, from the European Union, directed by the Germans. There's no popular mandate for this move, which in effect is basically highway robbery, really. A large number of Cypriots are going to lose a huge amount of money as a result of this deal. It can only lead, I think, to potentially civil unrest
but why is
in
this,
Cyprus.
Let me challenge you on this. Highway robbery. Okay,
sure.
Look, this new plan is the most market-based plan I've seen coming out of the European Union. What they're doing is they're basically holding wealthy depositors and other investors, shareholders, bondholders. This is a bail-in among those people, not a taxpayer bailout. Now, I agree there are transition issues here, and we're seeing one of these tough transition issues, whether there's bank runs in Cyprus or... But, Deb, now, this is what we should have done in the USA. We shouldn't have had taxpayer bailouts. We should have had bail-ins, not the guaranteed depositors. The guaranteed depositors aren't going to be hurt. It's the uninsured depositors. Why not?
Well, I see this really as evidence of the growing centralization of political power within Europe, which is very unhealthy. This is bad for national sovereignty. The Cypriot parliament hasn't even had a chance to vote on this measure. These terms have been dictated by Brussels at the direction of the Germans. I think it's very, very unhealthy for the future of Europe. It's going to prompt a bank run in many other parts of the Eurozone. You're going to see the same thing happening, no doubt, in Spain, Portugal, Greece, Ireland. There will be no confidence, I think, in the euro. This, in my view, is probably the beginning of the end, actually, of the Eurozone.
So you think this new template, which I believe is what Europe is bailout weary, okay? So is the rest of the world. So is the United States. You're telling me that this can't work. You're telling me that we should bail out, all these governments, all these taxpayers around the country. I thought the Heritage Foundation was against bailouts. You're telling me that taxpayer bailouts are good, but bail-ins by the responsible investors and depositors, the uninsured, is bad? This is the most market-based reform I've seen in this story since 2008.
Larry, I'm firmly against bailouts. I believe that Cyprus would be far better off outside of the European single currency, and therefore you wouldn't need some kind of massive bail. I'm firmly against bailouts.
Look, it's all about the Russian. It's all about the uninsured Russian depositors anyway, by the way, and let them pay for it. But all right, I understand that point. All I'm asking you, though, is this. What evidence do we have? I want to get to my two other experts in a minute. Do we have any evidence yet that Greek banks are going to be run on Greek banks, on Spanish banks, on Italian banks? Bond rates have gone up a little bit in Southern Europe, but not much, Niall. I don't see the panic yet.
Well, I think it's very disturbing when you have the Dutch finance minister, who's head of the Eurozone group of finance ministers, saying that this basically is the role model for the rest of Europe. That's a very, very clear signal of the shape of things to come, especially for a big economy like Spain, where already A lot of people are moving their money outside of Spain, even outside of the Eurozone altogether. So I do think this sets a very, very dangerous precedent for the entire Eurozone.
I know the transition is going to be difficult, but I don't know. Jeff Kleintop, I want to go to you. I mean, this whole story, we don't know what's going to happen tonight, tomorrow morning in Cyprus, okay? I'm hoping it'll be peaceful. Nobody knows. Michelle Crusoe Cabrera laid it out. They're going to have certain stipulations from what kind of cash you can take and cash you can't take. But to me, the broader policy makes a lot of sense. Why shouldn't the uninsured depositors and the bondholders and, of course, the stockholders have to pay for the bank's profligacy if that's the problem? To me, this is a great reform, not a bad reform.
It's a market-based reform, but it's a different way of thinking about a deposit in a bank. Unlike being a stockholder or a bondholder, just as a depositor in a bank, you're now investing in that bank. Now, certainly we know if you put money into a bank, you're beholden to its future in some way. But the idea that, wow, now you're investing is a different story. In Europe, businesses are far more, particularly small businesses, are entirely tied to banks for their credit. They don't have the fully deep and broad bond market we've had for many, many decades in the U.S. Most businesses get their credit, get their borrowing to do hiring, spending from the banks. If the banks are unable to lend that money, or they're now looking at this deposit as a risk at making payroll.
Well, there never was.
They may move that money elsewhere.
There never was. 100,000 euros was the limit. In this country, it's $250,000. You know, Jack Perusian, I was there in the 19th century when banks weren't guaranteed and there was no deposit insurance. And I saw bank runs. When a depositor puts his or her money in the bank, they have to inspect the credit of the bank. Now, the smaller depositor in Europe, under 100,000 euro, doesn't have to worry about that. But the big corporate depositors, with their uninsured, not guaranteed, why shouldn't they have to be examining the credit of the bank? That's the way a free market system works.
Larry, you are absolutely right. Look, you know, we want to say something here, and nobody really wants to say it, and that is that the Cypriots have been living on borrowed time. Their banking system has been broken now for a while. Look, if we were in a hospital, they would have been in an isolation ward for the last couple of years. So the fact is that they are now having to pay the price. The reality is that this is an isolated case. If we were going to see a run on other banks in Spain and Italy, we were already begun to see that. The only real victim, aside from the Cypriot people, is what is happening to the euro currency. Right. And I think that more than likely we're going to see that dip a little bit. And don't be too surprised if we start to see countries like Germany, for example, do wonders with a lower euro because of the exporting power. All
right, we're going to come back. I want to talk some more. I want to show you the difference between what European banks have done with our banks. Now, Gardner, I don't agree with you, my friend, but thank you very much for coming on. Jeff Kleintop and Jack Perusian come back. We're going to talk some U.S. stocks, including bank stocks. I still believe there are a bunch of reasons to be relatively optimistic about the American economy. Home prices, business investments, even tax refunds, heck, a railroading boom, the likes of which we have not seen in decades. It all looks pretty fair to me. We'll be right back.